So for this code along, we're going to do two major things. First, not too bad, we're going to create a global JS module, and then we're going to implement local storage. So let's just start with the global JS. So I talked about this in terms of looking at chat and recommendations. And the reason we want to develop a global JS is, first, it's pretty common to see this implemented, so that things like the references to the DOM by getting the ID, right, would be a very common way, because oftentimes, and we've already seen this in our code, especially when we started looking at the render, right, is we had to end up bringing over form as well in order for us to accomplish the edit part, right, our update part of our CRUD operation. So when we did that, I immediately said, you know what is a better way to do this? It's just another module. So in this case, we're going to create a module that doesn't necessarily have functions, although we could talk about if you want to put them there. Typically, you just put constants that you're going to use, or in this case, globals. So naming it global kind of makes sense. So down here, I'd create a new file, okay, global.js. And in global.js, I would first start looking at what have I, from a global perspective, been setting up for each module. So I would just take this code, cut it out, go over to global. Now, when I do this, I'm going to break my code. But it also brings up this, like, we no longer need this. Like, here's also an opportunity to clean some stuff up. So let's come back and clean up those references, because we no longer need that. It's not needed anymore. Okay, so first we'd have that. So then we go back to main, and then we could just say import. Okay. Oh, actually, sorry, before we do that, right, you always have to export. So import and export are like, you know, peas in a pod. You got to have them both. You can't import until you've exported. So, and I'm not going to do data. As a matter of fact, just for now, I'm going to get rid of it. Sorry, I'm not going to do output, because we don't need it right now. So under main, then I would just say, right, import form and import CFP data. Okay, from. And hopefully this you're getting a little used to. Global.js, which is on, make sure the JS is there. I'm not sure why it doesn't run, but sometimes it doesn't. I've seen that at least once for some of your code. So that's there. That looks good. Now it looks like I still have a reference here on 27, and I no longer need it because that was used in some of our older codes. So I'd also get rid of that in that location. And then I'd look at render. I'd be like, okay, what does render need? Well, it needs table and it needs form, but in global, I already have form. So all I really need from render then is this one. So I would get that, cut that. I would kind of group these together. I would also now export TBL, the reference to the tab data. I'd go over to render. I'd get rid of that, and I'd say import. Okay, TB. All right, I'm going to do form and TBL. The order in that case, I believe, does not matter. From global.js. Okay, so now that's good. And always, I always make a trip through, like, see, this doesn't need any reference. It's just exporting functions. Okay, so now we test, right? So now we test. So let's just go ahead and do that here, making sure that this is why, right? Daniel's hack totally makes sense, right? So I will do it again. So I make sure I have two. And again, what you want to do every time is test to make sure all of the functionality you had before you did this works. So I'd first hit delete, yep, and then I'd hit edit. Good, and the reason it's there is I need, perfect. So everything works, okay? So this was a short one, right? So go ahead and say implementing, or implemented maybe, global JS, and then we'll move on to talk about local storage, because that is such a, and just to preface the conversation or the code we're about to do, is that, as I've talked about before, right, when we refresh the page, any of our input data is being it is volatile. It is in the sense RAM, and what we want to do is make it long term. We want to make it something that persists when we refresh the page. But more importantly, this simulates or emulates the idea in the real world that we actually have to store stuff somewhere, because I mean, how many times have you gone in and you imagine if your bank suddenly didn't have all your records, it'd be like, yeah, what up with that? Anyway, commit that and then we'll move on to the next one.